6 p.m. here in Cairo. Time for Egypt news, and we start straight away with the main headlines. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discusses with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel bilateral relations and the viewpoints over regional and international issues. Addis Ababa hosts the first of 4 scheduled meetings of the Ministers of Water Resources of Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia on the Renaissance Dam. And the Israeli occupying forces launch fresh strikes against the Palestinian faction targets in Gaza despite the ceasefire. Welcome back. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discussed with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel bilateral relations and the viewpoints over regional and international issues, notably Libya. Over a phone conversation he received from the German leader, the president stressed the Egyptian unwavering position towards the Libyan crisis that calls for a restoration of the national Libyan institutions, putting an end to chaos caused by the terrorist and the criminal groups, and achieving stability through ending illegitimate foreign interference in the Libyan affairs. Meanwhile, the German Chancellor voiced interest in deepening cooperation with Egypt in all fields and willingness to review President al-Sisi's vision over Libya, given the country's pivotal role in Africa and the Arab world. The Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa today hosts the first of 4 scheduled meetings of the Ministers of Water Resources of Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia on the Renaissance Dam. The 2-day meeting is held with the participation of technical delegations representing the 3 countries, in addition to the representatives from the United States and the World Bank. The meetings were called for during U.S.-sponsored talks between the foreign ministers of the 3 countries in Washington on November the 6th. Today's meeting will probe terms of filling and operating the dam with the aim of striking a final agreement on the issue by mid-January. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli ordered a plan for tourism development to be urgently presented to the Higher Council for Planning and Urban Development as early as the Council's next meeting. The instruction came after Madbouli reviewed the plan drafted as part of the Egyptian 2030 vision for sustainable development over a meeting with the Ministers of Tourism and Housing and head of the Public Authority for Tourism Development. The tourism minister noted that the authority's strategy aims at increasing the nation's economic and social resources with the participation of the private sector. In Washington, the foreign ministers of the small group on Syria reiterated the support to achieve stability and security in the Syrian territories, as well as the rejection to force demographic changes. Wrapping up the meetings with the attendance of Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, the foreign ministers called all the parties to immediately put into effect a ceasefire agreement to end any military attacks. Meanwhile, the foreign ministers asserted the importance of safely delivering the humanitarian aids to the Syrian people. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry confirmed that the anti-Daesh international coalition needed to continue exerting efforts to achieve the targets and confront the terrorist organization. Shoukry made those remarks into the ministerial meeting of the small group of the Global Coalition to Defeat Daesh held in Washington. The foreign minister also warned against serious consequences of violating the Syrian territories and the Turkish aggression on the Syrian lands.
يمر العالم بمفترق طرق لتستمر مصر كما كانت دوما ركيزة أساسية لاستعادة الأمن والاستقرار في الشرق الأوسط. ولا يسعني إلا أن أؤكد رفض مصر للتدخل الأجنبي في الشؤون العربية، فقد آن الأوان أن تستعاد مؤسسات الدولة الليبية وتقوم مصر بدور نشط لجمع الفرقاء الليبيين. إن نزيف الدم في سوريا وغياب الأفق السياسي أمر لم يعد مقبولا استمراره، فالمطلوب واضح: وحدة سوريا وسلامتها الإقليمية. لا تدخر مصر جهدا لدعم وحدة اليمن وسلامته الإقليمية وفي وسط تلك التحديات التي يموج بها النظام الدولي، إلا أن مصر استطاعت أن تحافظ على استقرارها وسط محيط إقليمي شديد الاضطراب في ضوء ارتباط الأمن القومي العربي بما فيه أمن الخليج العربي بأمن مصر. على البشرية أن تستعيد جوهر إنسانيتها والوصول إلى عالم أكثر أمنا ورخاء لأجيالنا القادمة.
Welcome back. Israel launched fresh strikes against the Palestinian faction targets in Gaza early on Friday despite the ceasefire agreed after an escalation that killed 34 Palestinians, including 8 members of the same family. The details in the upcoming report.
Israeli occupation forces launched fresh air raids against Gaza's southern cities of Rafah and Khan Yunis overnight, allegedly in response to rocket fire from the strip against Israeli settlements in the vicinity of Gaza. Wounding 2 Palestinians, the new strikes come only one day after a ceasefire ended 2 days of Israeli shelling that left 34 Palestinians, including a family of 8 members killed and over 100 Palestinians wounded. The Israeli escalation began with a rare Israeli targeted killing of an Islamic Jihad commander, Baha Abu al-Ata. In response to the killing, over 450 rockets were fired from Gaza against Israeli settlements. Israeli medics said they had treated 63 people as of Wednesday night for mild injuries and stress caused by those rockets. The ceasefire that was brokered by Egyptian and UN officials came into force yesterday, allowing normal life to resume quietly in Israeli settlements near the Gaza border, while in the blockaded enclave residents had also embraced the return of relative calm. To keep a lid on tensions, Palestinians cancelled weekly protests along the border with Israel that have continued since March 2018 against the crippling decade-long blockade of the Palestinian Strip. At least 311 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire in Gaza or the border area since then, most of them during demonstrations and associated clashes.
A top Shiite cleric said in some of the strongest remarks yet on the protest movement that Iraq will be deeply marked by weeks of demonstrations demanding sweeping reform. In his weekly sermon delivered by a representative in the Shiite holy city of Karbala, Grand Ayatollah Ali as-Sistani piled pressure on the authorities to enact sweeping reforms in response to the deadly demonstrations. Protests erupted on October the 1st in an outpouring of anger over high unemployment and corruption, but have escalated into demands for reform of the political system. In Lebanon, Foreign Minister Gibran Basil said that the ex-finance minister Mohammed al-Safadi has agreed to be the next prime minister if he wins the support of the major parties, and the process to name him should begin on Monday. Earlier, 3 major Lebanese parties have agreed on nominating Mohammed al-Safadi to become prime minister of a new government. This came as the Lebanese protesters, who have been demanding radical reform, reacted with anger to the reported designation of the new prime minister they regard as emblematic of a failed political system. Kenya and Somalia have agreed to normalize relations and start reissuing travel visas to each other's citizens after a dispute over marine borders strained the ties between the neighbors. The agreement, announced by the Kenyan presidency, followed a meeting in Nairobi between the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Somali counterpart Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed. The East African leaders reaffirmed the strained relations that exist between Kenya and Somalia and agreed to explore the avenues of strengthening bilateral and diplomatic ties between them. Meanwhile, the American Secretary of Defense Mark Esper pressed South Korea to pay more for the cost of stationing the American troops in the country and to maintain an intelligence sharing pact with the other Asian ally, Japan, that Seoul is about to let lapse. Speaking after a high-level defense policy meeting with the South Korean counterpart, Esper also said that the two countries have to be flexible with the joint military drills to support diplomatic efforts to end the North Korean nuclear program. Earlier, North Korea said it had turned down the American offer for new talks ahead of the year-end deadline Pyongyang has set for Washington to show more flexibility in negotiations. Several banks working in Egypt decided today to lower the interest rates for the variable certificates by 1% a day after a decision by the Monetary Policy Committee at the Central Bank of Egypt to cut the key interest rates by 1%. The banks considered the new cuts, the fourth in 2019, are in the benefit of investors and the push to the stock exchange. The overnight deposit and lending rates were cut by 100 basis points to 12.25% and 13.25%, respectively. The Swiss International Federation or Foundation hailed the Egyptian investment atmosphere, pointing that it encourages the Swiss companies to invest and expand in Egypt. The Swiss Foundation said that the last amendments in the investment law were of great use, pointing that Egypt is considered the biggest market for investment in Africa. However, the foundation discussed with the Ministry of Investment means of boosting Swiss investments in Egypt that reach $2 billion and encourage the Swiss companies to invest in the country. And officials from the Communications and Information Technology Ministry met in Paris with the vice president of a leading world company specialized in technological solutions based on artificial intelligence. The meeting focused on the company's services, mainly in building expertise and preparing trainees, and the prospects for launching company investments in Egypt. And the Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Saudi Arabia was taking a tough stance on the output deal between the OPEC and its allies because of Saudi Aramco's initial public offering, but that Moscow respected Riyadh's interests. Speaking to reporters in Brazil at a summit for the BRICS countries, Putin said that Moscow should continue to work with OPEC and that cooperation should not only be on the oil production cuts. OPEC, Russia and the other oil producers have implemented a deal to cut the output by 1.2 million barrels per day. Egypt secured a precious 2-1 victory over Cameroon at the end of Group A matches at the Under-23 Africa Cup of Nations qualifier for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Mustafa Mohamed scored Egypt's 2 goals to be the top scorer of the tournament, with 4 goals giving his team 3 points, which put Egypt at the top of the group. By this result, Egypt leads the group with 9 points, while Cameroon's balance was frozen at 4 points in the second place and left the championship on goal difference after Ghana beat Mali 2-0. In another game in the same group of the Under-23 Cup of Nations, Ghana beat Mali 2-0 to qualify for the second place in the group with 4 points. Ghana also reached the next round with Egypt, while Mali was eliminated. And Egypt drew 1-1 against Kenya in the first round of the Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers at Burj Al Arab Stadium in Alexandria in Egypt. The Egyptian team got the first point in the qualifiers, while Comoros became at the top of Group G after beating Togo 1-0. And this brings us to the end of Egypt News for today. Thank you for watching and goodbye.